My name is Heffley, and I pride myself on maintaining my property. I live in a relatively quiet suburban neighborhood, or at least, it was quiet until Helen moved in next door. Helen, a woman who looked like she'd stepped straight out of a Karen starter pack, the perpetually offended expression, the aggressively blonde bob cut, and the designer sunglasses perched precariously on her nose, had made my life a living hell for the past few months. It started small, subtle microaggressions. "Are you sure you're using the right fertilizer for your lawn, Heffley? It seems a bit unruly." Or, "That music you play is awfully loud for this neighborhood, don't you think?" But things escalated quickly. I first noticed her casually strolling through my backyard a couple of weeks ago, claiming she was admiring my azaleas. I have no azaleas. Then came the accusations about my dog barking too much. He's a golden retriever puppy who mostly sleeps. And complaints about the color of my house. Apparently, beige is too ethnic. But the real kicker came when she started focusing on my pool. I just had it professionally cleaned and refilled. It was sparkling, crystal clear, a welcome oasis in the summer heat. I take pride in my pool, it's an expensive installation. Yet, one afternoon, I heard her voice ringing from my backyard. I went outside to find her, clad in a swimsuit, standing by the pool with a wrinkled nose. "This is unacceptable, Heffley," she screeched, pointing a manicured finger at the water. "This pool is disgusting. It's dirty. You're letting it go to ruin. How dare you have something like this in my neighborhood?" My blood began to boil. "This is my property, ma'am," I said, trying to keep my voice even. "And this is my pool. It was professionally cleaned last week. There's nothing wrong with it." She glared at me, her eyes narrowed. "Don't you get smart with me, boy," she hissed. "I know what's going on. You think you can just let things slide because nobody cares? You think you're above the rules." I just stared at her, dumbfounded. This woman was completely unhinged. I firmly told her to leave my property, informing her that if she came back, she would be charged with trespassing. She scoffed, "This isn't over," before stomping back towards her own yard, leaving me fuming and wondering what fresh hell tomorrow would bring. The next day, I was working from home, trying to ignore the lingering tension from the previous day's encounter. I was on a video call when there was a loud banging on my front door. Ignoring it, thinking it was some sort of delivery, the banging continued. I muted myself and went to the door, expecting a package. Instead, I found two police officers standing there, looking slightly confused. "Mr. Heffley?" one of them asked. "We received a call from a concerned citizen reporting a hazardous condition at your property. Specifically, they claimed your swimming pool is dangerously contaminated." My jaw dropped. I immediately knew who was behind this. "That's ridiculous," I said, gesturing towards my backyard. "My pool is perfectly fine. It's been professionally maintained and cleaned. I suspect this is a malicious complaint." The officers exchanged a look. "We have to investigate, sir," one of them said. "It's procedure." I reluctantly led them through the house and into the backyard. As soon as we emerged, Helen appeared at the edge of her property, a smug look plastered on her face. "See? I told you," she yelled, pointing dramatically at the pool. "It's a cesspool. It's a health hazard." The officers approached the pool, examining the water. One of them even dipped a test strip in. "Looks perfectly normal to me," he said, turning to Helen with a raised eyebrow. "The water is balanced, and there's no visible contamination." Helen's face turned a shade of red I didn't think was humanly possible. "You're all in on it," she shrieked. "You're protecting him because you know why." She didn't even need to say it. The implication was clear. This wasn't about a dirty pool. It was about the color of my skin. One of the officers sighed. "Ma'am, we need you to calm down. There's no evidence of any wrongdoing here. We're going to have to ask you to refrain from making false reports to the police." Helen wasn't having it. "False reports? I'm protecting the community. He's a menace." The situation escalated quickly. Helen, fueled by her own bigotry and a sense of entitlement, completely lost it. She stormed onto my property, ignoring the officer's commands to stop. "I'm going to show you how dirty this pool really is," she yelled, heading towards the water. Before I could react, she kicked off her sandals and jumped into the pool, fully clothed. She began splashing around, screaming about algae and bacteria that were clearly not there. "Look at this filth!" she shrieked, throwing water towards the officers. "This man is poisoning us all." The officers, initially stunned by her outburst, quickly regained their composure. "Ma'am, you are now trespassing and interfering with a police investigation," one of them said sternly. "You are under arrest." Helen, however, refused to comply. She thrashed around in the pool, screaming and kicking, making it difficult for the officers to apprehend her. "Get your hands off me," she yelled. "I know my rights. You can't arrest me for pointing out the truth." It took both officers to finally pull her out of the pool, soaking wet and still screaming. As they tried to handcuff her, she began kicking and spitting, calling them names and making wild accusations. I stood there, watching the scene unfold, feeling a mix of anger, disbelief, and a strange sense of vindication. This woman, who had made my life a misery for the past few months, was finally facing the consequences of her actions. I pulled out my phone and started recording the incident, knowing that I would need evidence of her behavior. As the officers dragged her towards the patrol car, she turned to me, her face contorted with rage. "This isn't over, Heffley," she screamed. "You haven't heard the last of me. I'll make sure you regret this." As the police were dealing with Helen, one of the officers approached me. "Mr. Heffley, we're going to take Ms. Helen into custody for trespassing, resisting arrest, and making false reports," he said. "We'll also be investigating the possibility of hate crime charges, given the nature of her statements." I nodded, feeling a small sense of relief. "Thank you, officer," I said. "I appreciate it." The officer then asked if he could take a look around my property. I agreed, happy to cooperate. As he walked around, he noticed something odd near the fence line separating my yard from Helen's. It was a small, almost hidden gate, obscured by bushes. "What's this?" he asked, pointing to the gate. "I didn't even know that was there," I replied, genuinely surprised. "I've never seen it before." The officer pushed the gate open and stepped through, finding himself in Helen's backyard. He walked around for a few minutes, then returned, a strange expression on his face. "Mr. Heffley," he said, "I think you need to see something." I followed him through the gate and into Helen's backyard. He led me to a corner of the yard, hidden behind a shed. There, lying on the ground, were several empty bottles of pool chemicals. The labels were torn off, but I recognized the brands. They were the same chemicals I used to maintain my pool. "These were hidden back here," the officer explained. "It looks like someone has been tampering with your pool water." I was stunned. It all made sense now. Helen wasn't just complaining about my pool being dirty, she was actively trying to make it dirty. She was sabotaging my property, then using that as an excuse to harass me. The officer took pictures of the chemicals and collected them as evidence. "We'll run some tests on these," he said. "But it looks like we have a pretty clear case of vandalism and malicious mischief." The evidence against Helen continued to mount. The pool chemical tests confirmed that she had indeed been tampering with my pool water, deliberately trying to make it appear dirty and unsafe. The police also discovered that she had a history of making false reports and harassing her neighbors. It turned out that I wasn't her first victim. Several other people in the neighborhood had complained about her behavior, but no one had been able to gather enough evidence to take action. This time, however, was different. With the evidence of trespassing, resisting arrest, making false reports, vandalism, and the potential hate crime charges, the district attorney decided to prosecute Helen to the fullest extent of the law. The trial was a circus. Helen, convinced that she was the victim of some grand conspiracy, refused to cooperate with her lawyer and spent most of the time ranting about reverse racism and the downfall of Western civilization. Her defense, if you could call it that, was that she was simply trying to protect the community from a dangerous and unsanitary pool. The jury, however, wasn't buying it. They saw through her lies and her bigotry. After a short deliberation, they found her guilty on all counts and sentenced her to 6 months in jail, a hefty fine, and mandatory anger management classes. They also issued a restraining order, preventing her from coming within 100 feet of my property. As she was being led out of the courtroom, Helen turned to me one last time, her eyes filled with hate. "You haven't won, Heffley," she snarled. "This is just the beginning." I simply shook my head and walked away, finally feeling a sense of peace. I knew that she would probably never change, but at least for now, she was no longer a threat to me or my community. The neighborhood could finally breathe again. The aftermath of the trial was surprisingly positive. The news of Helen's arrest and conviction spread quickly throughout the neighborhood, and I was overwhelmed with messages of support from my neighbors. Many of them had experienced similar harassment from her, and were grateful that she had finally been brought to justice. Some even admitted that they had been too afraid to speak out, fearing her retaliation. Seeing me stand up to her gave them the courage to share their own stories. I became something of a local hero, a symbol of resistance against bigotry and harassment. People thanked me for my bravery and for helping to make the neighborhood a safer and more welcoming place for everyone. I even received an award from the local community organization for my efforts. While I appreciated the recognition, I knew that the real victory was simply being able to live in peace, without fear of harassment and discrimination. I invested in security cameras and a more robust alarm system, just to be on the safe side. I also made sure to document every interaction I had with Helen, even after she was released from jail, which, thankfully, was uneventful. I learned that standing up to bullies is never easy, but it's always worth it. By holding Helen accountable for her actions, I not only protected myself and my property but also sent a message to the entire community that bigotry and harassment will not be tolerated. Eventually, Helen moved away, presumably to terrorize some other unsuspecting neighborhood. But her legacy remained, a reminder of the importance of fighting for equality and justice, and of never giving in to fear or intimidation. As for me, I continue to enjoy my pool, my dog, and my life in my quiet suburban neighborhood, grateful for the support of my community and determined to continue fighting for a more just and equitable world. And yes, I still get my pool professionally cleaned, just to avoid any future concerns. It's a small price to pay for peace of mind. The incident also made me realize I should invest in a fence so there can be no more trespassing issues.